All right. So the last thing I want to talk about in this module is now that we have this reconstructed climate, now that we have Earth's history kind of nailed down and dialed in, now that we know how we figure this all out, how does it compare to what's happened recently? So what I want to do is just very briefly touch on recent changes and why they're so concerning. That's the last thing we're going to do. And so this stuff kind of actually lines up a little bit with the history of climate science I talked about last time, pretty much from Eunice Foote's discovery on the relationship between carbon dioxide and air temperatures, and then Guy Stewart Calendar's stuff. So here we go. Oh, warming began in the early 20th century. So in the 1800s, the 19th century, after the Civil War ended, after industrialization began to pick up, took a little bit of time for that impact to be big enough to start to have an impact on our global temperatures. But once we changed the calendar over to the 1900s, we began to notice warming. It became so noticeable and so significant that by the time we were in the 1930s, scientists such as Guy Stewart Callendar began taking notice. They began publishing papers and doing research saying, hey, something is happening here. And there was this lady back in the 1850s, Eunice Foote, who said that this could happen, and now it's happening. Now it's happening. And so Guy Stewart Callendar released he published his study. Then World War II happened. Obviously, World War II and the reconstruction after World War II sort of took the priority. So this whole thing took a back seat. This whole thing took a back seat. And after it took a back seat, there wasn't as much studying going on. What's interesting, though, is that in the 1950s, we actually began to notice a leveling off and a very, very slight cooling period known as the mid-century cooling. And this is oftentimes referred to as the mid-century cooling event. What may have caused this, and how may have this actually been evidence for potential future warming? Well, the first thing, we saw a big spike in temperatures in the early 1940s during World War II. Obviously, when you're fighting a war, that's going to have a big greenhouse footprint. And we actually saw a pretty big spike in temperatures in the early 1940s, and then they kind of dipped in the late 1940s. So really that mid-century cooling was really only a correction from the end of World War II. The other thing, though, was that during that same time, much of the world, Europe, Russia, Japan, China, India, Northern Africa, these places that had been devastated by World War II were starting to pick up the pieces and put themselves back together. That resulted in a lot of industrial and economic activity. Meanwhile, here in the United States, we were the victors. We were happy. We were dancing and everything was going good. We were in the big booming 50s, the American dream. Everybody was buying a car and everybody was living, these nice houses, and there was a lot of suburban development and people were driving everywhere. All of this industrialization and economic development created a lot of pollution. Now, somebody might say, well, wait a second, this sounds very contradictory in nature. But pollution doesn't just have a warming effect. Only certain gases like greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane have a warming effect. Other things, however, such as particulate matter, that's the stuff that comes out in smoke, any kind of industrial emissions, zinc plants, steel factories, anything that has a lot of burning and melting, there's a lot of particulate matter that's thrown into the atmosphere as a result of that. So in addition to carbon dioxide, we were seeing increased particulate matter. Well, it's believed that this particulate matter actually resulted in a phenomenon called global dimming. Basically, what's believed to have happened was that this increased particulate matter spread around the world and slightly shaded us from sunlight, which basically caused temperatures to level off or maybe ever so slightly cool. Ever so slightly cool. During this time, some scientists were even beginning to suggest that we were entering a time of global cooling. So you had people like Guy Stewart Callender saying, hey, it's warming. You had David Keeling getting pretty alarmed and setting up the Mauna Loa Observatory and tracking carbon dioxide concentrations on the Keeling curve. But because temperatures had kind of leveled off, some scientists were actually suggesting a period of global cooling. A period of global cooling. This is how that mid-century cooling period kind of looked like. If you notice, there wasn't any real substantial decrease in temperatures other than that correction from the big spike in the early to mid 30s and the early 40s, and then a little dip after that. Temperatures then leveled off. But then as we got into the 70s and 80s, look what happened. Temperatures have been skyrocketing ever since. Temperatures have been skyrocketing ever since. Yeah, temperatures have been skyrocketing ever since. Why though? Why did temperatures level off during this time, and why have they skyrocketed ever since? Well, a lot of that stuff that we were putting into our atmosphere, a lot of the particulate matter, a lot of the stuff from zinc plants and so on, was hazardous to your health. There were actually major smog crises like the Denora smog crisis in Denora, Pennsylvania, and then the London smog incident in London that killed hundreds of people. So we realized in the 60s and 70s, we need to clean our air. We need to have cleaner burning cars. We need to have better pollution standards for factories. We need to clean up our air. And so in the 60s and 70s, Clean Air Acts became a thing. That resulted in some pretty good stuff. We actually saw our air clean up. Air quality, even on our bad days, is way better than it used to be in the 60s and 70s. Yay! The bad news is during this time, because carbon dioxide wasn't yet seen as this thing that we really need to be worried about, the focus on cleaning up our air was really on cleaning up particulate matter and things that were hazardous to breathe in. So those things began being taken out of our atmosphere while carbon dioxide continued to increase pretty unabatedly. And so carbon dioxide concentrations continued to go up. Carbon dioxide concentrations continued to go up. And as a result, now the sun is back to not being shaded, and carbon dioxide concentrations are going up. So as we got into the 1980s, air temperatures substantially began shooting up. And they've been shooting up ever since. So after 1980, warming both resumed and accelerated. And as I mentioned last time, this became alarming enough that in the late 1980s, the IPCC was commissioned, and they've been releasing reports basically telling us about each one of these scenarios ever since. And so every 5 to 7 years, they release a new report basically telling us how bad is the situation and how bad is it going to get. I covered them more so in the last module, so I'm not going to get into them as much right now. But we've even had our own modern cataclysmic events that have also affected climate. In 1991, in the Philippines, there was a mountain, volcanic mountain, Mount Pinatubo, that erupted, and that actually caused just about a little bit over half a degree of cooling from 1991 to 1992. This was it was an order of magnitude lower in intensity and in the amount of stuff it ejected from Mount Tambora. So this actually only ejected around 10 cubic kilometers of ash, which is still a lot of ash, still enough to result in global cooling, but not nearly as much as Mount Tambora did in 1815. After Mount Pinatubo, Earth continued to warm. In 2013, carbon dioxide reached 400 parts per million for the first time in recorded history. 2016, and now tied with 2020, that's a new development. Oops. Yeah. Sorry, my brain went faster than my pen, or my pen went faster than my brain. Tied with 2020. For the warmest year on 2017 was the second warmest, 2015 was the third warmest, and in fact, the 5 warmest years on record are the past 5 years. The 5 warmest years on record are the past 5 years. And in fact, 9 of the top 10 have all been since 2000, with the 10th being 1999. Every year, we are perpetually getting warmer and warmer and warmer and warmer. And yet many people still think the books are cooked. Many people still think this is some manipulation. Many people think this is some conspiracy theory. But we are seeing it right in our faces blatantly. Carbon dioxide concentrations are reaching records. Temperatures are reaching records. We're beginning to see ecological collapses all around the world. It is believed that we are entering the next mass extinction. This is really scary. But that being said, how do we know that what we have seen recently is not part of business as usual? Well, here's why. When emerging from our last ice age, we saw a nice big spike in temperatures. Well, what if I told you right now, the rate at which we are warming up is actually 10 times faster than our previous ice age and emerging from our previous ice age? How do we know that we're not emerging out of the larger ice age that we've been in? Well, because the transition from a cold period to a warm period takes millions of years. What we have seen recently is so rapid and so sudden, and every year it's getting warmer and warmer and warmer. It's not stopping. People 10 years ago said, oh, this will stop at some point. 20 years ago, oh, this will stop at some point. No, it keeps getting warmer. It's the rate at which this is occurring that is concerning us. It's not so much that the Earth is warming. The Earth goes through warming and cooling periods naturally. It's how fast it's happening. Temperatures have not been this warm in millennia. And in fact, when zooming out, temperatures have only been within 2 degrees Celsius in the past 10,000 years. We're about to pass that. And 8 degrees Celsius in the past 100,000 years. Well, the most generous predictions, or should I say the most conservative predictions, put us a little bit right at that 2-degree mark between now and 2100. We're talking about 80 years. The more pessimistic ones put us a lot closer to that 8 degrees Celsius. So we are seeing a lot of warming, and we're seeing it really fast, and it is way more drastic than anything we have seen in our reconstructed history. So that is why this is so concerning. But what's actually causing this warming? Well, I've talked about carbon dioxide concentrations going up, but what is it about carbon dioxide concentrations going up that even causes this to happen? Well, we're going to talk about that in the next module. So for now, make sure, take a moment, make sure that you understand the relationship between temperature and carbon dioxide. Make sure that you understand, just to remember, that there's more than just one peak and more than one bottom for each of those situations. And as always, don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions. And to those of you who aren't in my class and are watching this, I hope that you got something out of this. You're still welcome to reach out to me if you have any questions. And I'm always happy to debate this, but at the same time, please don't troll. All right, that's everything. Best luck on this module, and I will see you all next week. Bye.